The oil lamps flickered against the adobe walls of the Whitmore ranch house, casting dancing shadows across the faces of Cedar Ridge's most prominent citizens. Margaret Whitmore stood at the edge of the crowded parlor, her emerald silk dress feeling like a suffocating shroud, as she watched the men toast her upcoming marriage to Clayton Harding. The September heat had barely broken with nightfall, and the air hung thick with cigar smoke and the sweet stench of whiskey. "To my beautiful bride-to-be," Clayton's voice boomed across the room, his words already slurred from drink. "May she learn her place quickly." The men erupted in coarse laughter, their faces flushed red in the lamplight. Maggie's fingers tightened around her glass of lemonade, the crystal threatening to shatter in her grip. At 22, she had already turned down 3 suitors, much to her father's growing irritation. But Clayton Harding was different. Her father owed him money, and this marriage would settle both debts and business arrangements in one transaction. "Margaret, go speak to your intended," her father, Samuel Whitmore, commanded from across the room. His weathered face bore the permanent scowl of a man who had fought Comanche raids, droughts, and cattle rustlers to build his empire. "Clayton's been waiting." She forced a smile and approached the group of men gathered around Clayton. At 35, he was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair slicked back with pomade. His expensive suit couldn't hide the cruelty in his pale blue eyes, or the permanent sneer that played at the corners of his mouth. "There's my little filly," Clayton said, wrapping a possessive arm around her waist. His grip was too tight, his fingers digging into her ribs. "Just 2 more days, and you'll be Mrs. Harding." The other men chuckled knowingly. Maggie caught fragments of their conversation, talk of breaking wild horses and showing her who's boss. Her stomach churned, but she maintained her composure, having learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. As the evening wore on, the men grew drunker and their talk more explicit. Maggie excused herself to the kitchen, claiming she needed to check on the food, but really needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. She found their housekeeper, Rosa, cleaning dishes with violent efficiency. "You don't have to do this, Mija," Rosa whispered in her accented English, glancing toward the parlor. "There are other ways." "What other ways?" Maggie asked bitterly. "Father's made it clear. I marry Clayton or I'm disowned. And where would I go? What would I do?" Rosa's dark eyes flashed with something Maggie couldn't quite read. "The world is bigger than Cedar Ridge, Nina. Sometimes running toward danger is safer than staying with what you know will destroy you." Before Maggie could respond, Clayton's voice cut through the night air from the back porch. "Tom, I'm telling you, the key to handling women is the same as handling cattle. You show them who's boss from the start and they'll never give you trouble." Sheriff Tom Brennan's uncomfortable laugh drifted through the open window. "Well, Clayton, marriage is supposed to be a partnership." "Partnership?" Clayton's laugh was harsh and ugly. "Tom, you're too soft. Women are like wild horses, they need to be broken. And I guarantee you, by the time I'm done with little Margaret, she'll be as gentle as a lamb. A few nights of proper training and she'll never so much as look at another man without permission." The blood drained from Maggie's face. Rosa's hand found her shoulder, steadying her as the full horror of her future crashed over her. Clayton continued, his voice growing more animated with drink and male approval. "Hell, I might even let her keep some of that fire. Makes it more interesting when you're taming them. But she'll learn to heal just like any other animal." The men's laughter felt like knives in Maggie's chest. She gripped the edge of the wooden counter, her knuckles white with strain. In that moment, she realized that marrying Clayton Harding wouldn't just be a loveless arrangement. It would be a slow death of everything she was. "I can't," she whispered to Rosa. "I can't do this." "Then don't," Rosa replied firmly. "Your horse is still saddled in the barn. The moon is dark tonight, good for traveling unseen. But where would I go? I don't know anyone beyond Cedar Ridge. Sometimes you don't need to know where you're going, Mija. You just need to know you can't stay where you are." The sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden floor made them both freeze. Clayton appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with alcohol and something darker. "There you are, my dear. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." His smile was predatory. "Come here." Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to walk toward him. Clayton's hand caught her chin, tilting her face up to his. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. "You're going to make a fine wife, Margaret. Very fine indeed." His thumb traced her lower lip with possessive familiarity. "I think it's time we discussed some of the expectations of marriage. Clayton, perhaps we should wait." "Wait." His grip tightened painfully. "I've been waiting long enough. Your father and I have business to conclude, and you're part of that business. The casual way he spoke of her as property, combined with his earlier words about training her, made Maggie's decision. She smiled sweetly and nodded. "Of course, Clayton. You're absolutely right. Perhaps we could discuss this privately tomorrow." His grip loosened slightly, pleased by her apparent submission. "That's my good girl. I knew you'd come around." As soon as Clayton returned to his drinking companions, Maggie slipped quietly toward the front door. The celebration continued behind her, the men's voices growing louder and more raucous with each passing minute. She grabbed her riding cloak from the front hallway, her hands trembling as she wrapped it around her shoulders. The night air hit her like a physical blow after the stifling house. Above, the stars wheeled across a moonless sky, providing just enough light to navigate by. The barn loomed ahead, dark and welcoming. Inside, her mare, Duchess, nickered softly at her approach. "Easy, girl," Maggie whispered, her voice shaking. "We're going on a little trip." She saddled Duchess with practiced efficiency, her father having insisted she learn to care for her own horse. As she worked, she could hear the men's voices carrying across the yard, Clayton's laugh rising above the others like a howl. With her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, Maggie led Duchess quietly out of the barn and toward the back gate. The celebration continued inside the house, no one noticing the figure disappearing into the vast darkness of the Texas frontier. As she mounted and urged Duchess into a quiet walk, Maggie looked back once at the warm lights of her family's ranch. Then she turned her face toward the unknown wilderness ahead, choosing the dangers of the frontier over the certain destruction waiting in Clayton Harding's hands. The night swallowed her whole, and Margaret Whitmore rode toward a future she couldn't imagine, knowing only that it had to be better than the one she was leaving behind. The first pale light of dawn found Margaret Whitmore 20 miles from Cedar Ridge, her emerald dress torn and muddied, her carefully arranged hair now a tangled mess beneath her riding hood. Duchess picked her way carefully through the rocky terrain, both horse and rider exhausted from their night-long flight across the unforgiving Texas landscape. Maggie's hands were raw and blistered from gripping the reins, her body aching from hours in the saddle. She had never ridden so far or so hard, but the memory of Clayton's predatory smile and his crude words about training her drove her forward. Every shadow seemed to hide pursuing horsemen. Every sound made her heart race with terror. The sun climbed higher, bringing with it the crushing heat that would make travel dangerous during the day. Maggie guided Duchess toward a cluster of mesquite trees near a small creek, hoping to find shelter and water. As they approached, she heard voices, two men speaking in the distinctive guttural tones of the Comanche language. Fear paralyzed her. She had heard stories her entire life about what happened to white women captured by Comanche warriors. Her father's own sister had been taken in a raid 15 years ago and never seen again. But before she could turn Duchess away, one of the men stood up from where he had been kneeling by the water. Running Wolf had been tracking the stolen cavalry horses for 3 days when he heard the sound of a lone rider approaching. At 28, he was tall for a Comanche with the lean build of a man who had spent his life on horseback. His long black hair was braided with feathers and beads, and traditional paint marked his cheekbones, but his eyes held an intelligence that spoke of time spent in the white man's world. "White woman," he said in English to his companion Grey Hawk, who was several years younger and had never learned the settler's language. "Alone. She rides like she flees from something." Grey Hawk's hand moved instinctively to his tomahawk. She could be a spy or bait for a trap. Running Wolf studied the approaching figure more carefully. The woman sat her horse poorly, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Her expensive dress was inappropriate for hard travel, and she carried no weapons that he could see. Most telling of all, she was making no effort to hide her approach. Any spy would have been more careful. "She is no spy," Running Wolf said finally. "She is desperate." Maggie's heart hammered as the two Comanche warriors stepped into full view. The older one was clearly the leader, his bearing proud and alert. When he spoke, his English was startlingly clear with only a slight accent. "You are far from your people, white woman. This is not safe country for one traveling alone. Maggie's voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I need water. For my horse." Running Wolf gestured toward the creek. "Water is free to all who need it. But you did not answer my question. Why do you travel alone?" As Maggie dismounted on unsteady legs, she noticed that both men watched her with intense curiosity rather than hostility. The younger one kept his hand near his weapons, but the older one seemed more interested in solving a puzzle. "My name is Running Wolf," he said, surprising her with this courtesy. I was educated at the mission school in San Antonio before I returned to my people. You may speak freely." The kindness in his tone, so different from Clayton's cruel demands, nearly broke her reserve. "I'm Margaret Whitmore. I'm running from a marriage I cannot accept." Grey Hawk spoke rapidly in Comanche, his tone questioning. Running Wolf replied in the same language, then turned back to Maggie. "My friend asks why you do not simply refuse this marriage. Among our people, a woman cannot be forced to marry against her will." Maggie's laugh was bitter. "In my world, women are property to be traded. My father arranged this marriage to settle his debts. If I refuse, I'll be disowned and left with nothing. And if you accept—" The memory of Clayton's words made her shudder. "The man I'm supposed to marry. He spoke of breaking me like a wild horse, of training me to be obedient." She looked up at Running Wolf, seeing understanding in his dark eyes. "I chose to face the dangers of the wilderness rather than submit to that." Running Wolf translated for Grey Hawk, whose expression shifted from suspicion to something like respect. Among the Comanche, courage was valued above all else, and this white woman had shown considerable bravery in choosing the unknown over certain brutality. "You know they will follow you," Running Wolf said gently. "White men do not easily give up what they consider their property." As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed across the morning air. Maggie's face went white with terror as she recognized the rhythm of multiple horses moving at speed. She ran to Duchess, but the mare was too exhausted to outrun fresh mounts. "Please," she whispered, looking at Running Wolf with desperate eyes. "I know you have no reason to help me, but I'm begging you. Don't let them take me back." Running Wolf studied her face for a long moment. In the mission school, he had learned to read the expressions of white people, and he saw no deception in her fear, only genuine terror. More than that, he saw a spirit that refused to be broken, much like his own people who had fought so long to remain free. The hoofbeats grew closer. Through the morning haze, they could see riders approaching, 5 men on horseback, led by a figure in a black hat. "That's Clayton Harding," Maggie breathed. "The man I was supposed to marry." Running Wolf's jaw tightened. He had heard of Harding from other traders, a man known for his cruelty to both animals and people, who treated everything and everyone as possessions to be owned. "Grey Hawk," he said in Comanche, "take the woman north, toward the canyon country. I will delay them." "You risk much for a white woman," Grey Hawk replied, but he was already moving toward his horse. "I risk much for someone who chooses freedom over safety," Running Wolf corrected. "That is a choice I understand." Clayton Harding's voice carried across the distance as the riders drew closer. "Margaret, I know you're here. Come out now, and I'll forget this foolishness." Running Wolf placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder. "There is an old trading post 15 miles north near Devil's Canyon. It has been abandoned for years, but the walls still stand. Grey Hawk will take you there." "What about you?" Maggie asked, though she was already allowing Grey Hawk to help her onto Duchess. "I will buy you time," Running Wolf said simply. "But you must understand, once I help you, I become an enemy to your people. And my people may not understand why I protected a white woman." Maggie met his eyes, seeing the sacrifice he was making. "Why are you doing this?" Running Wolf's smile was sad, but determined. "Because some things are more important than the color of one's skin. Freedom is one of them." As Grey Hawk led Maggie and Duchess away through the mesquite, Running Wolf mounted his paint horse and rode toward the approaching riders. Behind him, he could hear the fading hoofbeats of the woman he had chosen to protect, and ahead, the angry shouts of the men who would now consider him an enemy. The hunt had begun in earnest, and Running Wolf knew that his decision to help Margaret Whitmore would change everything, for both of them. The abandoned trading post squatted against the red cliff face like a wound in the earth, its adobe walls crumbling under years of neglect and weather. Margaret Whitmore sat in the shade of what had once been the main room, her torn dress providing little protection against the sharp stones and thorny brush that had torn at her during the grueling ride with Grey Hawk. For 2 days she had waited in this desolate place, surviving on water from a nearby spring and the dried meat Grey Hawk had left before disappearing back into the wilderness. The young Comanche warrior had spoken no English, but his gestures had been clear. Stay hidden, stay quiet, and wait. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race with terror. Had Clayton found her? She pressed herself against the crumbling wall, trying to make herself invisible, when she heard a familiar voice calling out in English. "Margaret Whitmore, it is Running Wolf. You are safe." She emerged from her hiding place to see the Comanche warrior dismounting from his paint horse. His face was grim, and she noticed fresh cuts on his arms and a purple bruise along his jaw. "You're hurt," she said, moving toward him with concern. "It is nothing," Running Wolf replied, but his slight wince as he moved suggested otherwise. "I brought supplies. We cannot stay here much longer." As he unpacked his saddlebags, Maggie saw dried meat, hardtack, and a water skin. More importantly, she saw a woman's buckskin dress and moccasins. "You must change," Running Wolf said, not looking at her directly. "Your dress marks you as a white woman from miles away. In these clothes you might pass for mixed blood if we are seen from a distance." While Maggie changed behind a fallen wall, Running Wolf told her what had happened. "Your intended husband grows more desperate. He has convinced the sheriff that you were taken by force. They offer a reward for your return, and for any Comanche found helping you." "I'm so sorry," Maggie said, emerging in the buckskin dress. The soft leather felt strange against her skin, but it moved with her body in a way her restrictive corsets never had. "I never meant to put you in danger." Running Wolf turned to look at her and paused. In the buckskin dress, with her dark hair braided in a simple style, she looked like she belonged to the wilderness, but it was her eyes that held his attention, still frightened, but now carrying a determination that hadn't been there before. "Danger was already here," he said finally. "Men like Clayton Harding bring danger wherever they go. You have simply chosen not to submit to it." As they prepared to leave the trading post, Maggie asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why did you help me? You don't know me, and helping me has made you an enemy to both our peoples." Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, checking his horse's tack. "When I was 14, I was captured by Mexican slavers. They sold me to a mission school in San Antonio, where the priests tried to civilize me. I learned to read and write, to speak English, to understand the white man's ways." He mounted his horse and waited for her to do the same with Duchess. "For 3 years I lived in their world. I saw how they treated their women, like property to be owned, traded, controlled. I saw wives beaten for speaking out of turn, daughters married off to settle debts, women with no voice in their own lives." They rode in silence for a while, following a narrow trail that wound through the canyon country. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, with red rock formations rising like ancient cathedrals around them. "Among my people," Running Wolf continued, "women choose their own husbands, they own their own property, they have voices in council. When I saw you choose the wilderness over slavery, I recognized something familiar." "What was that?" "The same spirit that drove my people to fight, rather than live on reservations. The same choice between freedom and safety that every warrior must make." As the day wore on, Running Wolf taught Maggie the skills she would need to survive in the wilderness. He showed her how to read the signs of weather in the clouds, how to find water by watching the flight of birds, how to move through the landscape without leaving obvious tracks. "You learn quickly," he observed as she successfully identified edible plants he had shown her. "Most white women would have collapsed by now." "Most white women weren't raised by a father who treated them like sons when it suited him," Maggie replied with a bitter smile. "I can ride, shoot, and track better than most men in Cedar Ridge. My father found it amusing until it came time to make me into a proper wife." That evening, as they camped in a hidden box canyon, Running Wolf watched Maggie tend to the small fire they had built. She worked with quiet efficiency, her movements showing the adaptation that came from necessity. "You cannot go back," he said quietly. "You understand this?" Maggie nodded, staring into the flames. "I know. Even if Clayton withdrew his proposal, I would still be the woman who ran away. No respectable man would marry me, and my father would never forgive the shame I've brought to the family name. And you cannot go forward as you are. A white woman alone in this country will not survive long, even with the skills I can teach you." She looked up at him, seeing the gravity in his expression. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that tomorrow, Margaret Whitmore must disappear forever. If you are to survive, you must become someone else entirely." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. Everything she had been, everything she had known would have to be left behind. But as she thought about it, she realized that the woman she had been, the obedient daughter, the proper lady, the commodity to be traded, was already gone. "Who would I become?" she asked. Running Wolf considered this carefully. "There are mixed-blood women who live between both worlds. They trade with settlers, work as interpreters, survive by being useful to both sides while belonging fully to neither. It is a hard life, but it is a free life. And you? What happens to you?" His smile was sad. "I am already lost to both worlds. I have been since I chose to help you. My people will see me as contaminated by white influence. Your people will see me as a savage who stole their woman. I can never return to either." The fire crackled between them, casting shadows that danced on the canyon walls. In the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered from different directions, a pack calling to its own kind across the vast wilderness. "Then we're both outcasts," Maggie said finally. "Yes," Running Wolf agreed, "but we are free outcasts." As they settled down for the night, Maggie felt a strange sense of peace despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in her life, she was making her own choices, facing her own consequences. The price was everything she had known, but what she had gained was immeasurable. Tomorrow she would learn to become someone new. Tonight, she slept under the stars beside a man who had risked everything to give her that chance, and she was grateful for both the gift and the giver. The woman who had fled Cedar Ridge in emerald silk was gone forever. What would emerge in her place remained to be seen. The old trading post materialized out of the pre-dawn mist like a ghost from another time. Margaret Whitmore, now calling herself Maria Santos, a mixed-blood trader, crouched beside Running Wolf behind a cluster of boulders, watching the abandoned buildings with growing unease. "Something is wrong," Running Wolf whispered, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. "We should have reached the Rio Grande by now, but Greyhawk was supposed to meet us here with fresh horses." It had been 5 days since they left the canyon country, 5 days of hard travel through increasingly dangerous territory. Maggie had adapted to her new identity with surprising ease, learning to braid her hair in the mixed-blood style, to speak with the slight accent Running Wolf had taught her, and to carry herself with the confident bearing of a woman who belonged to the frontier. But now, as they studied the silent trading post, both felt the weight of approaching danger. "There," Running Wolf pointed to a wisp of smoke rising from the main building's chimney. "Someone has been here recently." They approached cautiously, leading their horses through the scrub brush. The trading post consisted of 3 adobe buildings arranged around a central courtyard, the main trading room, living quarters, and a stable. All showed signs of recent occupation. As they reached the courtyard, a familiar voice called out from the shadows of the main building. "Well, well, if it isn't the little runaway bride and her savage protector." Clayton Harding stepped into the morning light, his expensive clothes now dusty and travel-worn, his face bearing the stubble of a man who had been riding hard for days. Behind him, 4 other men emerged from concealment. Sheriff Tom Brennan, 2 deputies, and a hired gun Maggie didn't recognize. "Hello, Margaret," Clayton said, his voice carrying the same possessive tone she remembered from their engagement party. "You've led us quite a chase." Running Wolf stepped slightly in front of Maggie, his body tense and ready for action. "She chooses not to go with you. Honor that choice." Clayton's laugh was harsh. "Honor? You're talking about honor, savage. You kidnapped a white woman and turned her into your squaw. The only honor here will be when I put a bullet in your red hide." "I kidnapped no one," Running Wolf said calmly. "I helped a woman escape from a man who spoke of breaking her like an animal." Sheriff Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Clayton, maybe we should..." "Should what, Tom? Let this animal keep what's mine." Clayton's face was flushed with rage and something darker. "Look at her, Tom. Look how he's dressed her up like one of his kind. God knows what he's done to her out there." Maggie stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "He's done nothing but treat me with respect, something you never did." "Respect?" Clayton's voice rose to a shout. "I'll show you respect, you ungrateful little—" "Enough!" Sheriff Brennan's voice cut through the tension. "Margaret, if you come with us willingly, we can work this out. Your father's worried sick and the town can go to hell," Maggie said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "And so can my father. I'm not going back to be Clayton's property." Clayton's hand moved to his gun. "Property? You're damn right you're my property. I paid good money for you and I'm not leaving empty-handed." "She is not property," Running Wolf said, his voice carrying the deadly quiet of a man ready to kill. "She is a human being with the right to choose her own path." "Human being?" Clayton spat. "She's a woman, and women don't get to choose. They get told what to do by their betters." The hired gun, a lean man with cold eyes, spoke for the first time. "This is taking too long, Harding. Just take the woman and let's finish the Indian." Running Wolf's hand moved to his knife, but he was outnumbered 5 to 1. Maggie saw the calculation in his eyes. He would fight, but he couldn't win. Not against these odds. "Wait," she said, stepping toward Clayton. "I'll come with you." "No," Running Wolf said sharply. "You do not have to—" "Yes, I do," Maggie interrupted, her eyes never leaving Clayton's face. "Because if I don't, you'll kill him, and I won't have his blood on my hands." Clayton's smile was triumphant and ugly. "That's better. I knew you'd come to your senses eventually." As Maggie walked toward the group of men, she felt the weight of the small knife Running Wolf had given her, hidden in her boot. She had learned much in the past week, including that sometimes the only way to win was to make your enemy believe he had already won. "You're right, Clayton," she said, her voice taking on the submissive tone she had perfected over years of surviving her father's rages. "I was foolish to run. A woman needs a strong man to guide her." Clayton's chest puffed with pride. "Exactly. And don't worry. I'll make sure you never have the chance to be so foolish again." Sheriff Brennan holstered his gun, looking relieved. "Well, that's settled then. Let's head back to—" "Not quite settled," Clayton said, his eyes fixed on Running Wolf. "The savage still needs to pay for what he's done." "Clayton, she's coming willingly now," Sheriff Brennan protested. "There's no need—" "There's every need," Clayton snarled. "He touched what's mine. He took her from me, and he's going to pay for it." Running Wolf stood perfectly still, his dark eyes meeting Clayton's with unflinching courage. "If you must kill someone, kill me. But know that she chose to leave you. I did not take her. She ran from you." "And why would she do that?" Clayton's voice was dangerously soft. "What lies did you tell her about me?" "No lies," Running Wolf replied. "Only what she heard with her own ears. Your words about breaking her, about training her like an animal." For a moment, Clayton's face showed genuine confusion. Then understanding dawned, followed by rage. "You were listening? You little—" His hand flew to his gun, but as he drew it, Maggie moved. The knife from her boot flashed in the morning light as she lunged forward, not at Clayton but at the hired gun who was already raising his rifle toward Running Wolf. The blade caught the gunman in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his shot wide. In the same instant, Running Wolf threw himself sideways, his own knife finding the throat of the nearest deputy. Chaos erupted in the courtyard. Sheriff Brennan shouted for everyone to stop, but his words were lost in the gunfire. Clayton's pistol roared. The bullet meant for Running Wolf instead, shattering adobe from the wall behind him. "Get down!" Running Wolf shouted to Maggie, but she was already moving, using the confusion to roll behind a water trough. Clayton fired again, this time at Maggie. The bullet splintered the wood inches from her head. "You want to act like a savage? I'll treat you like one." Running Wolf saw the gun swinging toward the woman he had sworn to protect. Without hesitation, he threw himself between Clayton and Maggie, his body taking the bullet meant for her. The impact drove him to his knees, blood spreading across his chest. But even wounded, he managed to throw his knife with deadly accuracy. The blade buried itself in Clayton's gun hand, sending the pistol spinning away across the courtyard. "You son of a bitch!" Clayton screamed, clutching his wounded hand. "Kill them both!" But the remaining men hesitated. The hired gun was down, clutching his shoulder. One deputy was dead, the other wounded. Sheriff Brennan stood frozen, his gun half drawn, staring at the carnage that had erupted from what should have been a simple arrest. Running Wolf collapsed forward, his breathing labored. Maggie crawled to his side, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest, trying to stop the bleeding. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do that?" Running Wolf's eyes found hers, and despite the pain, his voice was steady. "Because some things are worth dying for." Clayton was advancing on them, having retrieved his pistol with his good hand. "Touching, but it changes nothing. You're still mine, Margaret. And he's still going to die." As Clayton raised his gun for the final shot, Maggie made her choice. She would not let Running Wolf's sacrifice be in vain. Rising to her feet, she faced Clayton with all the courage the wilderness had taught her. "Then you'll have to kill me too," she said simply, "because I'll never be yours, not willingly, not ever." The sun had risen fully now, bathing the abandoned trading post in harsh light. In the distance, dust clouds on the horizon suggested more riders approaching. The confrontation that had been building for days was about to reach its bloody conclusion. The dust cloud on the horizon resolved into a war party of 12 Comanche warriors, their paint horses thundering toward the trading post with deadly purpose. At their head rode Greyhawk, his face a mask of controlled fury as he took in the scene before him. Running Wolf bleeding in the dirt, a white woman kneeling beside him, and armed white men with weapons drawn. "Well, this just gets better and better," Sheriff Brennan muttered, finally drawing his gun. Comanche war party. Clayton Harding's face went pale despite his bravado. Facing one wounded Indian was one thing, facing 12 mounted warriors was suicide. But his rage overrode his survival instincts. "I don't care if the whole damn tribe shows up," he snarled, keeping his pistol trained on Maggie. "She's mine, and I'm taking her back." Greyhawk's war cry echoed across the courtyard as the Comanche warriors spread out in a classic attack formation, but instead of charging immediately, Greyhawk held up his hand, stopping his men just outside rifle range. "Running Wolf!" he called out in English, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Are you alive, brother?" Running Wolf struggled to raise his head, blood frothing at his lips. "Alive," he managed to gasp, "but not for long." Greyhawk's eyes swept the scene, taking in every detail with the tactical awareness of a seasoned warrior. He saw the dead deputy, the wounded gunman, the blood on Clayton's hand, and the way the white woman protected Running Wolf's body with her own. "The woman fights beside you?" Greyhawk called out, surprise evident in his voice. "She saved my life," Running Wolf replied, his voice growing weaker. "She chose to stand with me." This revelation sent a murmur through the Comanche warriors. A white woman who fought to protect one of their own was unprecedented in their experience. Sheriff Brennan, recognizing the precarious nature of their situation, took a step forward. "Look, we don't want trouble with your people. We just came to bring back a kidnapped woman." Greyhawk's laugh was harsh. "Kidnapped? The woman who stands ready to die beside Running Wolf was taken by force." "She was confused," Clayton shouted, his desperation making him reckless. "The savage filled her head with lies. She belongs with her own kind." "Her own kind?" Greyhawk's voice dripped with contempt. "You mean the kind that shoots an unarmed man? The kind that treats women like cattle to be owned?" Maggie found her voice, calling out to Greyhawk in the few Comanche words Running Wolf had taught her. "I so choose the freedom. I choose you to stand with Running Wolf." The broken Comanche phrases, spoken in her clear voice, had an electrifying effect on the warriors. Here was a white woman who had learned their language, who spoke of choice and freedom in terms they understood. Greyhawk spoke rapidly to his warriors in Comanche, then turned back to the white men. "The woman has spoken. She chooses her own path. This is the Comanche way. This is the white man's country," Clayton raged. "She's a white woman, and she follows white man's law." "White man's law?" Greyhawk's eyes blazed with anger. "Your law that says women are property. Your law that justifies shooting a man who protects the innocent. What civilization is this?" Running Wolf's hand found Maggie's, his grip weak but warm. "Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them what you choose." Maggie stood slowly, her hands still bloody from trying to staunch Running Wolf's wound. She looked from the Comanche warriors to the white men, seeing two worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. But in that moment, she realized the truth. Civilization wasn't about the color of one's skin or the language one spoke. It was about honor, respect, and the courage to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "But that woman is dead. She died the night she chose freedom over slavery." She turned to face Clayton directly. "You want to talk about white man's law? Then let's talk about it. You spoke of breaking me like a wild horse. You called me property to be owned. You shot an unarmed man who was protecting me. Which one of us is civilized?" Clayton's face twisted with rage. "You're talking nonsense. You're a woman. You don't get to make these choices." "I already have made them," Maggie replied firmly. "And I choose to stand with people who see me as a human being, not a commodity." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sheriff Brennan wiped sweat from his forehead, acutely aware that they were vastly outnumbered. The wounded gunman had passed out from blood loss. Clayton stood alone in his fury, his injured hand making his grip on his pistol unsteady. "This is madness," Sheriff Brennan said finally. "Clayton, we need to go. Now." "I'm not leaving without her," Clayton snarled. "Then you're going to die here," Greyhawk said simply, "and your death will accomplish nothing." It was Running Wolf who broke the deadlock. With tremendous effort, he pulled himself to his knees, his face gray with pain, but his voice strong. "Greyhawk," he said in Comanche, then switched to English so all could understand. "I am dying, but before I die, I claim the right of adoption for this woman. She has shown courage worthy of our people. She has chosen freedom over slavery, honor over comfort. Let her choose where she belongs." The formal declaration sent another murmur through the Comanche warriors. The right of adoption was sacred, allowing members of other tribes, or even other races, to be accepted as full members of the Comanche nation. "You can't be serious," Sheriff Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I am completely serious," Running Wolf replied. "She has proven herself in battle. She has chosen to stand with us despite the cost. By Comanche law, she has earned the right to decide her own fate." Clayton's scream of rage echoed across the courtyard. "She's white! She's mine! No savage adoption ceremony is going to change that." He raised his pistol, but his wounded hand shook with pain and fury. The shot went wide, the bullet embedding itself in the adobe wall. Before he could fire again, Greyhawk's arrow took him through the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. The remaining white men threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. "It is finished," Greyhawk announced. "The woman has chosen her path." Maggie knelt beside Running Wolf, taking his hand in both of hers. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold, but his eyes were clear and peaceful. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you sacrifice everything for me?" Running Wolf's smile was weak but genuine. "Because I saw in you and what I have always believed, that courage and honor are not bound by the color of one's skin. You proved that a person's worth is measured by their choices, not their birth." As the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Margaret Whitmore made her final choice. She had fled Cedar Ridge as a frightened girl in silk and emeralds. She had crossed the wilderness as Maria Santos, a woman learning to survive between two worlds. Now, as she held the hand of a dying warrior who had given everything to protect her freedom, she understood who she truly was. Not white or Indian, not civilized or savage, but simply human, with all the courage, compassion, and capacity for both cruelty and kindness that the word implied. Greyhawk approached and knelt beside them. "He spoke truly," he said softly. "You have earned the right to choose your people." Maggie looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I choose freedom," she said. "I choose honor. I choose to remember that courage comes in all colors, and that sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is stand against civilization itself." Running Wolf's hand squeezed hers one last time before going limp. But his sacrifice had not been in vain. In a harsh land where two worlds collided with deadly frequency, he had proven that understanding could bridge any divide, if people were brave enough to build that bridge with their own lives. The woman who had once been Margaret Whitmore rode north with the Comanche, carrying with her the memory of a warrior who had taught her that true freedom was worth any price, and that honor knew no boundaries of race or culture. Behind her, the trading post stood empty once again, but the echo of gunshots and the memory of choices made would linger long after the desert winds had covered the bloodstains with sand.